Okay, so today we're going to be covering 17.4 and 17.5 is what I have down in my lesson plans. Some of this I think we've actually covered already, so we can go pretty fast through this, and then hopefully you'll have some time to work on your assignment maybe at the end of the period. Okay, so 17.4 talks about osteicthes. And oste means what? Maybe you can get a hint from the slide. What do you think oste means? Okay, bone or bony. Okay, and then ichthyes means what? Latin for what? Fish. Okay, so these are the bony fish. Fish that most people eat are of this kind. They have a bony skeleton. They have a pectoral. We have a pectoral girdle and a pelvic girdle. Which one is the pelvic girdle? Down here, right? Our hips make up our pelvic, are part of our pelvic girdle, and the bones that make up the shoulder blades and things like that are our pectoral girdle. They have fins attached to the pectoral girdle, and they also have fins back here by their pelvic girdle, but they're not, like physically attached as they are, like the front ones are. Now, as far as how they move around, you know that if you've ever watched fish in an aquarium, if they're not moving very fast, they're typically just moving these fins here, right? And then maybe this one that's right there, their pectoral fin, to help them kind of slowly navigate around, as they're looking for food or whatever. These other fins are more to make them go straight through the water. So they're not, moving sideways or anything like that. The caudal fins, the back one, which is they're all run by muscle, but this one clearly has the strongest muscles because it can bend its whole spine by contracting the muscles on one side and then on the other side, and they can make the fins go back and forth like that, and they can swim very fast. If you've ever been fishing and the fish takes your bait and then takes off with it, that is the fin that they're using to move rapidly out to usually deeper waters where they like to always go. Now, in order for them to swim upright like you typically see fish, they have a swim bladder. It's not always quite this big as it shows right there. If you've ever cleaned fish, I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but if you've ever cleaned a fish, taken out the insides out of the fish, you can see the swim bladder. It's up close to the backbone, right underneath the backbone. Most of the fish I've ever fished with probably have only a swim bladder. It's maybe about that size. It's only, and it's right up against a very thin membrane over it, and it's filled with gas. Okay, what did we learn? I think we've already talked about it. What did we learn about the, and it did manage to turn itself off, didn't it? What did we learn about the scales? What about the scales can tell us a little bit how old they are? What about the scales can tell us how old they are? You see it?
Don't they layer kind of?
They what?
Don't they have layers?
Yeah, they have like layers or little, you can kind of see these faint little lines that go, they're easier to see under a microscope than if you just look at a fish's scale. You usually don't see them that easily unless it's a very big scale or something like that. You might be able to see those, but they have little like little rings on them, just like a tree does, that kind of indicate how old they are. And if they live, in fresh water where you clearly have seasons, it will give you an indication probably about how old the fish is. Yes, how big they are kind of gives you a clue that if they're big, they've been around a while. So they have scales. They are covered with mucus. A lot of people call that fish slime, but it's actually a mucus. It helps them glide through the water. It protects them from infections and things like that. And probably for protection too, because if the predator doesn't get a good grip on them, they're just going to get a mouthful of slime as they slide away. They also have the cells for making color. Some fish, if you know, are very colorful, and others, pretty much blend into the bottom of the, the lake or pond or stream or river or whatever it is. They kind of blend in. But some of them are very colorful, and these are specialized cells that have pigments in them that give them that color. As far as digestion, they kind of have the whole thing. They have a mouth, but they also have teeth. But what are the teeth for? What are the teeth in a fish's mouth for? Is it for chewing? Nope. Fish don't chew their food. So the teeth are often, if you look into their mouth, they're often slanted a little bit toward the back, so that if they grab a hold of something, as if they try to wiggle away, their teeth just dig in farther. So, it's really just to grip their prey, and then also to help, since it's pointing backward toward their throat, they can swallow it. They have a very flexible pharynx, which means they can swallow pretty large prey, or predator, and a prey, yeah, it's prey, the right word. They can swallow some pretty large stuff. Sometimes I've seen some fish where what they had swallowed was maybe, almost half again as long as they, or not again, half as long as they are. So they can swallow some pretty large stuff. And so that throat has to be pretty flexible to allow that big of a fish to go down the throat. Our throat isn't anywhere near that big. Our throat doesn't stretch much. If you ever swallow something a little bit barely too big, you can really feel it as it's trying to go down, or it doesn't want to go down. So they have a flexible pharynx. They have an esophagus that leads to the, what's the next organ? Stomach, right? Leads to the stomach. And then after that, they will have intestines back in here. It all stays in this portion. There's not really, this is almost all muscle back here. When you're eating a fish, this is often the part that, you're after, because that's where it has the most meat. They also have, here it's called accessory organs, something that helps the food to digest. So they have a pyloric cecum that produce digestive enzymes. They do have a large liver. In fact, in some fish that they catch, they're after the oil that's in the liver. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of cod liver oil. Okay, so it's cod, catching the cod fish, and when they clean them, they're after the liver part, and they can squeeze it to get the oil out of it. So there is oil inside of their livers. The gallbladder is just for storing stuff that the liver produces. You have a gallbladder as well. Your liver produces bile, and it gets stored in the gallbladder. And then when you eat food, for instance, in humans, when we eat food that's has a large amount of fat in the food, then we need the bile salts to help digest. It helps break the oil down into tinier droplets that has more surface area, so it can be digested faster. All those kind of things like that we talked about. They also have a pancreas. It's hard to think of that. Even a fish has a pancreas. When it comes to respiration, they have gills, and the covering over the opening where the gills, these would be underneath this covering, And the covering is called an operculum, and they use that to help with taking oxygen out of the water. The operculum is kind of like a cover, and then they will have so they'll take, sort of like open their mouth, water will fill the mouth, then they'll close their mouth, and then they'll kind of raise the floor of their mouth a little bit, and that will want to push water out through a hole, and then they just open up their operculum, and the water will flow out the back, and then they just kind of repeat that. So that way they can move water across their gills without having to move forward. Like sharks need to move forward to be able to get fresh water over their gills, whereas they can kind of pump it across their gills. And you can see the different parts of the gill. But when you open this up, this is the first thing you'll see when it's really reddish color, because it has a lot of what in the gills? What do you think the red's from? From the blood, right. The hemoglobin that's in the blood, where the oxygen is going to be attached to. They have a closed circulatory system, so in addition to a heart, what other three vessels do they have to have in order to be called a closed circulatory system? So what are the three vessels?
Arteries, veins, and capillaries.
Okay, arteries, veins, and capillaries. Okay, arteries, veins, and capillaries make up a closed circulatory system. Their heart is only two chambered. Okay? Now, the receiving part of the heart is called the atrium. The part that pumps the blood out is the ventricle. And yes, there are little valves in there so that blood doesn't move backwards through the, so when this squeezes, we don't want it going back into the atrium. We want it to go in this direction. So the blood will flow into the atrium. It will squeeze, and the blood will flow into here. And then when this squeezes, and notice that this has a lot more muscle in it, it's going to be pumping blood over a greater distance, so it needs more power behind it. And so when this squeezes, then the blood will flow out like that, in that direction. And this is our artery over here, and this is our vein coming in over here. So they have a complete circulatory system. The part that's different than ours is that we have a 4-chambered heart. 2 chambers work at receiving blood from the body and pumping it to the lungs. Then after it goes through the lungs, it comes back to the heart again and has a receiving chamber from the lungs. And then the other ventricle then pumps it out to the rest of the body. And it's going to be the side of the heart that has the most muscle in that side of the heart, because it's pumping it to the whole part of the body. So they have an atrium and a ventricle. Those are the 2 parts that almost every heart has. Theirs just has 1 of each. We have 2 of each. And we will talk about some animals that have 3 chambers. They have 2 atrium, but only 1 ventricle. We have 2 ventricles. So here's the different places where the blood will have to go. Have you noticed that sometimes after you eat, you get kind of sleepy? Like after lunch, you're kind of hard to stay awake in those next classes, isn't it? Man, Saturday we're driving back from the bridge contest. Man, I was having a hard time staying awake. We just finished eating and we got right back in the car and started driving, and man, I was having a hard time. Luckily, somebody wanted to start talking, so at least I had somebody to talk to. But and the reason why you get this tired feeling is your body is putting a lot more blood flow to your digestive system and less to other parts of the body, so your brain's not maybe getting as much blood flow as it was before, and so you're going to be more sleepy than that. Also, if you don't have as much blood flow to some parts of your body, you know, like the muscles of your body, if you exercise strenuously after eating, you know, you could cramp up and things like that because the blood flow is being diverted to your digestive system instead of to the muscles of your legs or something like that. Okay, now as far as the nervous system, they have a brain and a spinal cord, you know, just like you'd expect them to have. What did we learn the other day about that by looking at the brain can tell us about the animal? What did we learn? Like this one looks like it has pretty large olfactory lobes, has a pretty large optic lobes, a pretty large cerebellum, but I don't see a whole lot, you know, not very much of the cerebrum. Okay, so what does that tell me possibly about this fish? If it's the olfactory has to do with, that has to do with your sense of smell. Would they need, from the size of this, does it appear they need to have a sense of smell? It's pretty good size. So that would mean they probably rely heavily on their sense of smell. I don't know if you've ever been fishing. One of the things you need to be very careful about is if you're handling the bait or the lures or whatever it is, and your hands are dirty, not with fish line, but with other things, the fish can smell that, that doesn't smell right, and will avoid your bait or your lure. Anna still with us? Okay, they have a pretty large optic lobe, so what would that mean? They need their eyesight. They rely heavily on their eyesight to avoid being caught or to catch prey, find prey, spot prey. I don't know if you've ever been out fishing, especially if you're fishing with a lure. As that lure moves through the water, they're watching that thing moving through the water, and they're going to decide whether or not to go after it or not, and they will follow it, you know, and hopefully move fast enough to catch it. You know, you don't want to reel it in so fast that they can't swim that fast, but you know, you want them to want it, you know. So they have a large optic lobe. They have a powerful sense of smell. This back here, remember this we said this coordinates muscular activity. So fish need to be coordinated to be able to avoid being caught and to catch their prey. Then we also have this lateral line down here. It has lots of little pits in it where they can sense, you know, like the current that's in the water. It can tell things about like what minerals or ions are in the water and things like that by just sensing that. Now they're not thinking through that, but that information they can use to you know, move away from some area or towards some area. But that is a sensory organ right along there. Okay, excretion, they do have kidneys and a bladder, and they empty the bladder out through the same opening that they're going to use also to release sperm or eggs. So they use the same opening for both. Humans, like females, have separate ones for those. Males, we kind of use one for both. Reproduction, external fertilization. What would that mean? Well, that means that the female fish is going to release her eggs. Usually she'll find some place in the water where the water isn't running, isn't flowing, kind of still, so she can deposit her eggs on it. And that process of depositing her eggs is called spawning. And then after she has spawned, the male fish will swim over the eggs and release the sperm. And we call that milk. And so Then the sperm will find the eggs, fertilize the eggs, and they will then mature into little baby fish. At first, when they hatch out, I don't know, did any of you ever go up to the middle school science room last year when they had the trout in there? Any of you see that? They, at first, when they got their little baby trouts, they still had their yolk sac still attached to their body. So it looks like a little miniature fish, and they have this big blob underneath their body, which is part of the egg left over, where they're deriving nourishment from them to help to grow in size. Now, most are oviparous. What does that mean? Ova, or has to do with what? Ova. Ovum, had that word, haven't we, a number of times. What does that mean?
Isn't that where they're nurtured in the mom's body?
Well, what does just that much of it mean? But you're right. It means egg, okay? So oviparous, that means that their young are produced by hatching from an egg, like I just described with the trout. The trout eggs were then fertilized by a male trout, and then these fertilized eggs, after they're a certain size, I think before they would send them to the school to be in that aquarium, but they hatch from the egg. They aren't inside a mom at all. Once it's fertilized, that all happens outside of both male and female. It's external, as it says here. Okay, so that finishes up the bony fish. Then we have the agnatha. They're kind of like a class all by themselves. They are, I think, rather ugly-looking creatures, but they're still God's creation nonetheless. As you can see, it has an eye, but they're jawless. In other words, they don't catch their prey. They don't swallow their prey in the classic sense that we're talking about here. But they do have these very sharp little teeth inside their mouth. They will go up to a large fish, suck onto this side of it, and then those raspy little teeth will chew away the scales and their skin, and as they start to bleed, they then will start swallowing this and deriving their nourishment from the fish in that way. So it's not necessarily a good thing, obviously, for the fish. They're a parasite that lives on the side of the fish. They can let go if they need to, but that's how they kind of just ride along. Wherever the fish goes, they go. And they're deriving their nourishment from the body fluids of the fish that they've attached to. So that's the lamprey eel and the hagfish. Both, that's kind of descriptive of that. The lamprey eel has been an issue up in the Great Lakes. Then we have the cartilage fish. Chondrichthyes means cartilage fish. And bony fish, we have found fossils of bony fish, but we don't find many fossils of cartilage fish, like sharks. The only thing that you can find of the shark are their teeth, because they're very hard. When I was working on my master's, and we'd go on different geology field trips quite often. They were like on Saturdays, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with much of Kansas, but northwest of Salina, Kansas, north of Hays, Kansas, there is a reservoir up there, and on the south side of the reservoir were some highways that ran through there. And when they had made the highways, they had cut through the rock layers in some places, and they were older roads. And when they cut through the rock layers, the dirt is right underneath it. But then after a while, the rain and erosion washes out underneath the rock layer, kind of undercuts it. And our professor he showed us a place, and he says, now just run your hand along the bottom side of this rock layer, and if you touch something sharp, grab a hold of it, wiggle on it, and take it out. And it was actually shark's teeth. So we found quite a few shark's teeth, but it was on the bottom side of this rock layer. So you didn't have to, chip out the rock or anything like that. You could just take out, just kind of wiggle it out. And they were shaped kind of like this, and then they came around like this. And this is the part right here that would be like in the shark's gum. And then the top part the edges were serrated. Like, I don't know if you've ever looked at shark's teeth, but they are kind of serrated on the edge, so that when they hook on the flesh, it kind of saws or cuts through. So now, not all sharks have that kind of teeth, by the way. Some sharks have teeth, and we did find those not there, but at other places that we were looking for fossils, they're kind of rounded like this and then flat. They were probably about this much across. So their whole mouth on the inside was lined with these really hard bumps. And those particular sharks were the kind that liked to eat like clams and stuff like that. They'd pick the clam up in their mouth, and they would use these rounded teeth to kind of like crush the shells, and then they would just swallow the whole thing. Now if you've ever felt a shark skin, I like at a aquarium or something like that, sometimes they let you touch them. What does it feel like? Anybody remember? Yes.
It's kind of smooth.
It actually feels really rough, like sandpaper is actually what it feels like.
I felt
Now,
like
it could be you mean, was it a regular shark, or is it,
It was kind of more purple, like a ray.
maybe, yeah, because I don't know what a ray feels like, but I know sharks have, their skin is almost like sandpaper. In fact, I've heard of some places where primitive tribes would catch sharks, and then when the skin dried, they would actually use it more like sandpaper, because it's really raspy. I mean, you can't, it's probably not as good as regular sandpaper, but it was pretty rough on your skin. But it's only rough in one direction. Run your hand the other way, and then maybe you ran it in the right direction, it was smooth. But the other direction is, it feels rough. Okay, so sharks are in that category. The rays and the skates. So you have stingrays, manta rays, and then we have some that we call skates. Now, their reproduction is rather interesting compared to regular fish, so that's why we have to put them in a different category, is they have internal fertilization. So mom has the egg inside, dad or the male shark will deposit sperm inside their body. And most of them are oviparous. So what did oviparous mean again? They lay eggs. So in other words, most sharks will actually lay eggs, and then they will hatch outside of the shark. But there are some of them that are ovoviviparous, and then there's still a fewer yet that are viviparous. Okay, so what is this? We know that the first part of this means what again? Egg. And then this V-I-V-E, viva or whatever you want, means to be born alive. So how does that work? Okay, well, this shark produces an egg, but it's not attached like by an umbilical cord or anything. It just stays inside the shark until it's hatched out, and then it will come out of an opening in the shark's body looking like it's been born alive, but it actually hatched out from an egg, but it derived no nourishment from mom. Like when you were still inside your mom, your body derived nourishment from mom. That's this kind right here, okay? where you didn't hatch, your mom, and the whole time you were developing, you were deriving nourishment directly from mom. So this one, you come out alive. This one, you also come out alive. This one, you hatched from an egg and derived no nourishment from mom. This one is like what we, most mammals that you know, or mammals that you know about are gonna be this kind. They are born alive. While you're still in your mom's womb, you are deriving nourishment from mom. And and thus you have a belly button. Okay? Did Adam and Eve have a belly button? Probably not. Because nobody gave birth to them, right? God made them that way. Now, could he have added a belly button so they wouldn't look weird? Could have, but there was no need. You would just had added one, just so you don't look different than